Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. Welcome to the latest instalment in the Astral Aviation workshop series. Thanks for joining us. This one is on return to flying, and it's great to see so many of you again with us this evening. My name is Chris Kidd, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm the Director of Astral Aviation Consulting. And we are doing a bespoke GA training program on behalf of the UK CAA, of which this is part of it. And we're going to keep providing the community, the GA community, with safety resources throughout the year. So if you want to stay in the loop on what's going on with our events and the workshops that are coming up, then please sign up to our mailing list. And you can do this by going to our website, www.astralaviationconsulting.com. And that will be going in the chat box shortly. So you can click on that straight away if you want to. Signing up will also give you access to the replay of this workshop and other associated resources, so please go there and have a browse. I'm delighted to be joined again this evening by Matt Lane, our resident single and multi-engine flight instructor and flight examiner, who is also the head of training for RAF Sport Aircraft, who I know for sure will be really looking forward to get back in the air now the days are getting longer and the weather is improving. Hello again, Matt.
Hi, Chris, and great to see so many people joining us on a half-term Wednesday as well. So, yeah, welcome, everybody. Look forward to chatting to you soon.
Good stuff. Right. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to break this workshop down into 3 sections. In section 1, I'm going to cover off what topics we think should be revised prior to going flying again. And in section 2, Matt's going to cover some common threat and error management and stuff that can help you prevent incidents and accidents in that transition back into the air. And then finally, in section 3, it'll be time for Q&A. As always, please do get involved with the polls as we go throughout the workshop, and please add any comments you have in the chat box, particularly if you want to share some stuff, any learning that you may have, any experiences that you've got from returning to flying, for example, stuff that can benefit other people. If you have any questions, then please ask them via the Q&A function, and we'll endeavour to answer them at the end or at appropriate times as we go through. So, without further ado, let's crack on with it, shall we? Right then, where do I revise? Where do I start? Good question. Right, before I do start discussing that, I'm going to start with a quick poll, please. So here we go. Here's poll number 1. So what is your GA flying experience over the last 3 months? So December until now, in terms of hours. So just obviously there's no right or wrong answer to this, just really looking for a dip check on to see who's been doing how much flying you guys have been up to, and it will kind of inform the way we take the workshop in terms of some of the guidance that we might go with. Let's give you a few more seconds to click the relevant button on there before bringing up the answers. Right then, here we go. So 37% haven't flown. We got so even split, it's pretty much an even split between 1 to 2, 3 to 5 hours, and a bunch of people have flown more than 5 hours. So a pretty broad spectrum in there, really. So of course, for those of you that have flown a reasonable amount over the last 3 months, you'll find you have less to revise than others, obviously, because you're pretty current. However, I still think there are things within this workshop that even the most current and experienced pilots don't keep on top of. So hopefully there'll be something in this for everybody. Okay, so back to the question then. So what should you revise prior to getting back in the air? For me and for Matt, it's all about preparation and planning. And we can break that down into the 3 things you can see on the screen there. So the 3 Ps: pilot, plane, and profile. It's worth noting that you can revise the things that we're going to raise today in any order you wish, but we've elected to keep it pretty simple in the 3 Ps. So without further ado, let's talk about the first one, shall we, which is pilot. So a mantra of mine really is prepare, prepare, prepare. If you haven't flown very much over the winter months, and the more preparation you can do, the easier it will be when you get back in the cockpit. This will involve quite a lot of work, obviously, because those muscle memories will have faded and everything's going to seem 10 times harder than it did before. All those things you could previously do without thinking are going to actually require thinking about, and they will reduce your capacity because those muscle memories just aren't there. So the more you can prepare, the easier it's going to be. A good place to start really is the flight manual. So when was the last time you looked at it? Have a read, remind yourself, what should you be doing and how should you be flying certain profiles such as stalling, circuits, etc. It's a good start, the flight manual, of course, but there's a whole bunch of other documents out there as well that we need to cover. So start with the flight manual, but let's talk about the license next. What about your license? Bit of a wordy slide. I'm not going to read it to you, but looking at the title, can I legally fly? Something's definitely worth reminding yourself about are the privileges on your license and any associated currencies that may entail. Are the ratings in your license up to date? Are they in date? Are you current to fly solo, or does your first flight back need to be with an instructor? Here, there's some thoughts on the screen for you to read there. Remember, of course, things like holding a lapel, you don't need to revalidate, but you do need to satisfy the recency requirements. What about currency to fly passengers? Also, where did you leave your logbook all those months ago? I mean, it sounds like a simple thing, right? But I'd have to probably do some digging through some pretty deep and dark cupboards to find mine right now. If you have any questions or anything to do with license privileges, because it can be a bit of a minefield, and in fact, Matt and I were talking about this the other day, and he reminded me of a symposium that he went to, and there are 120 slides just on different licenses and different privileges. So it can be a minefield, hence why we've recreated some of it on the screen. But if you do have any of those questions, then please do raise them through the Q&A function. But the bottom line really is it is complex, as you can see on the screen there. So if you are unsure about your license or ratings, please seek the advice of a flying instructor or examiner or your flying association if you belong to one, because it is a minefield. And we're not going to be able to cover all those this evening. But like I say, if you've got any questions, then stick them in the box. So we've checked your license and reviewed the flight manual. Okay, that's a good start. Noting, of course, that some permit to fly aircraft don't even have a published flight manual. So you might be a case of reviewing what information you do have. So we've done those two things. What's next? We reckon it's probably a good time to start looking at the checks. So do you learn your checks off by heart, or do you use a checklist? Whichever one it is, refamiliarize yourself with the checklist. Well, you first might have to find it. It's probably in the same place as your logbook, right? Because it's probably been a while. You don't want it to appear to be written in a foreign language, right? So the first time you pick it up, you don't really want to be sat in the airplane the first time you pick the checklist up, having not flown for 3 months, because it will look like gobbledygook to you. And it will also put you under pressure, particularly when you can't find those pre-takeoff checks when you're at the hull with 4 other aircraft behind you. So the more you can do before you get to the aircraft, the better prepared you'll be. Whilst we're talking about checks, what about emergency procedures? How familiar are you with those? Have a read through them. Are there critical actions that you could commit to memory that would help you? For example, if the engine fails at a critical moment and you don't have time to get the checklist out. That's something I used to do. I do remember learning emergency drills back in the day, lying in the bath. So that was one of my bath time routines, going to learn my emergency drills over and over and over again. And then I had a girlfriend of mine test me on them. So, I had so many hours of fun right there. But it did work because I did manage to commit them to memory. Once you're back in the saddle, I would recommend running through an emergency of the day on your pre-flight prep, so you keep them ticking over. So pick one, run through the actions, then think about what you'd actually do if that emergency happened to you, say on takeoff, for example, or on landing, or in the circuit, or out in the local area. Where would you point the aircraft? What profile would you fly? What would you say on the radio? If you can rehearse that and think about that well before that stuff happens, then you're going to be really well prepared for your flight. And that's probably goes for any flight really, but particularly if you haven't flown for a while. So now we've reviewed the flight manual, we've checked the license, and you've refamiliarized yourself with the checklist. So it's time to get your personal kit sorted. So if you always fly in your favorite pair of flying trousers, then go and dig them out. They're probably with the logbook and probably with the checklist in the bottom drawer somewhere. So put them in your flying bag, along with your favorite pair of flying sunglasses, your iPad, and other such charts, and all the other equipment that you normally take. So get all that stuff together. Check also, when you're doing that your charts are in date, for example, and make sure you update your iPad software. We see this time and again that pilots have a bit of time off and don't give themselves enough time to prep. End up in a rush, and the one thing they always forget is their favorite. It's not going to be your favorite flying jumper or your pair of flying trousers. It's going to be to update the iPad software. So while we're talking iPads, make sure you refamiliarize yourself with the software. Are the overlays set up correctly? What about the NOTAMs? Are they switched on? Spend some time refamiliarizing yourself with it well before you go anywhere near the aircraft. Undoubtedly, if it's had a software update, it's probably reset all the settings, hasn't it? And if it's been a bit of time off, then you do a software update. You need to double check that all those settings are back on, ready for flying. Also, have a look through any other kit that you might have, such as headsets and torches. Are they still working, for example, or are the batteries dead? Maybe put a fresh set of batteries in as part of your annual return to flying routine. That way, at least for this season, you can't go wrong. Finally then, what about you as a person? Do you have any new medical issues, for example? Is your medical in date? How are you feeling about preparing for flight? You might feel a bit anxious. I certainly used to, with a reasonable amount of time off, particularly. And that's perfectly normal, of course. However, by preparing thoroughly, hopefully your anxiety will reduce and you'll be more confident as you step for the aircraft. So that's you, the pilot, and the prep you can do on that. So let's look at the aircraft. I'm sure there are many of you that are owners of your own aircraft or own a sharing one, and therefore the aircraft might not have flown for the same amount of time as you have. Equally, it might be a rental. Therefore, it could have flown pretty regularly. Therefore, it'll be airworthy, obviously, and in good running order. So you can have a bit of a mismatch depending on whether you are an aircraft owner and not flown, or you're using flying club aircraft. However, no matter when it was last flown, it's important you carry out a detailed pre-flight inspection. Take your time and allow plenty of time not to only reacquaint yourself with the aircraft and the pre-flight checks, but also to really look at what you're actually checking. It's a good opportunity to do that annual, almost recalibration. Remember, we spoke about normalization of deviance a few workshops ago, and normalization of deviance is where over time we end up doing things completely differently than the approved method, because we get used to This is a good opportunity to recalibrate yourself to doing things like check properly. It will take time, a lot more time than you think. However long you used to give yourself to do the checks or do the walk around or review the tech log, double it and you won't get far wrong. There are a couple of ways I approach this if I haven't flown for a while. Firstly, if I was flying, yes, your AirPods are on. Firstly, if I was flying on my own, I would do the checks once. Again, for the checklist, then once finished, I would do them again.
Right, I think Chris's audio has dropped out. So I think what we'll do while Chris resets that is let's have a look at poll 2 on screen, if we can do that, Chloe. Yep. So can we have a look at poll 2 on screen? Okay. Okay. How are people hearing me in this webinar? Are people hearing my stuff fine? Chris, do you want to try again, Chris? Okay, so yeah, okay, great. I think my audio is working just fine. So I think it's obviously a problem at Chris's end there as well. So we've covered praying. What we might do is move on to slide 7 on profile. So if we can do that.
Aha! I'm back.
You're back, Chris. Brilliant.
Thanks for picking that up.
I was just riffing and all the rest of it. So Chris is back. Is I don't know, somebody's put some more money in the meter in London. So great. So
sorry about that. Slight Bluetooth issue where my computer started to connect to everything in the room apart from what it should be connected to. Right, where did we get to?
So we were just finishing off plane, and I think Chloe was going to put our link to the LAA leaflet, and then we were going to have a look at poll 2 just before we moved on to profile.
Lovely job. Cool. So let's go to poll 2 then, please. Here we go. So what do you consider to be the most important aspect of your return to flight prep? Reviewing the procedures, preparation of the aircraft, planning for the flight itself, or reviewing the checklist. No wrong or right answer here, just really interested in your views. Of course, it's hugely subjective, because of course it will be different for someone who's just got their PPL versus someone who's been flying their whole lives. So let's look at, give me a few more seconds on that, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, reviewing procedures. Interesting one, preparation of the aircraft, down at 17%, planning for the flight, and reviewing the checklist. So yeah, it's good to see that everyone's obviously thinks they're important. And we'll cover all of those as we go through here. But going back to what I said at the beginning, when you could actually hear me, it's prepare as far as I'm concerned, which covers all of those, which is good. Okay, let's look at profile then. So returning to flying is a great opportunity to stop any normalization of deviance, which I was talking about, which you may or may not have heard of, which may have built over the last flying period. So you need to read really the actual manual. No, don't just read your notes. Please revise the actual aircraft procedures, even maybe reading some of the CAA caps, we should really know them, but how often do we really get to read them? So going back in a return to flying kind of thing once a year, it's probably a really good opportunity to go through those manuals, read them properly, look at the caps, etc. If you do it once a year, probably now's a good time to do it. Reading the latest version of these at least once a year is a good way to keep yourself current with the rules, regulations, and procedures. So it's worth taking your time to revise them. In terms of your flight profile, it's a good idea to revise the airfield procedures, of course, any local airspace. Has it changed since the last time you flew, for example? Has the taxi pattern changed? Are the departure and arrival procedures the same? Or were they the same, but you've previously been flying them incorrectly, which is something that I did a few years ago. Nothing more embarrassing to be taxiing out to the runway to discover that the taxiway is blocked by work in progress. It was advertised, but you didn't read the NOTAMs or the revised airfield procedures. So I had a period of flying a few years ago, and I personally found it really difficult to get back up to speed. So whilst I was preparing as much as I could prior to going flying, I found it difficult to adjust to procedure changes that had come in since I'd been off. I've been off for about 2 years at this point. So in particular changes, for example, to the departure procedure that now needed me to do a 10-degree heading change once I got above 500 feet for noise abatement. I kept wanting to revert back to the way I'd done it for years, which is just get airborne and fly straight ahead. And it took me quite a long time for that to become second nature. And it was only by reading the procedures again and not assuming that I knew what I was doing that I even spotted that change. So yeah, it goes back to reading the stuff really. Okay, finally then, let's look at thinking about that first flight back. Should you be heading off on a solo land away to Scotland in poor weather, having not flown for 3 or 4 months? Or maybe, a local area refresher, some skills work such as stalling and steep turns, followed by circuits. Maybe that might be more appropriate, get you back in the groove. The latter, that local area work, that skills work gives you the opportunity to brush away those cobwebs and refresh yourselves on the basics in a low pressure, familiar environment before trying to tackle any more challenging flying. So I would thoroughly recommend that. So having considered all the prep and spoken about, having considered all the prep we've spoken about, and you revise all your manuals, all the regulations, checklists, charts and procedures, and decide on the flight profile, we now need to plan our flight. So planning, of course, is a key aspect of any flight. I think you'll agree. And if you've been away from flying for a while, it can often be overlooked or rushed. Consider the weather, the flight profile, airspace, NOTAMs and procedures. Some people, including me, sometimes take the time to sit down and armchair fly the flight, visualizing what you'd be doing at each stage and how to fly different aspects of it. This can be particularly beneficial if you haven't flown for a while, of course, and we've seen that a large portion of the audience this evening haven't flown for the last 3 months. It's also even better if you can use something like a cardboard cockpit or a picture of the cockpit layout on your computer, so you can remember where all those switches are and get the hands moving in the right area, get that muscle memory back before you get to the aircraft. Something worth considering in all this is the use of a pre-flight preparation checklist. We were delighted to recently work with John Hunt, the flying reporter, on this topic, and we've produced our pre-flight prep checklist, which is available to download for free on the Astral Aviation Consulting website. John also released a video on pre-flight prep, so please check out that on his channel. Again, links to these will go into the chat box now. Right then, this looks pretty daunting, doesn't it? How long should you or should I give myself to do all this prep? There's a lot to do, particularly if you've been out for a while. I've listed out what I think should be covered prior to going anywhere near the aircraft. If you can, in the run up to your flight, try to allocate yourself enough time per topic to get yourself back up to speed. I've allocated some, nominal timings on that, but if you're pretty current, then actually you might be able to skip out some of these. Equally, if you're starting from scratch, I would thoroughly recommend you go through at least the stuff on the screen. Basically, when you look at that list, obviously it's quite extensive. Pretty much we should have all started last month, considering there's so much on it. So that's enough for me. Apologies for the slight intermission there. I'm going to hand over to Matt now, who's going to talk about some common gotchas. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Chris. Great. If we could have the next slide, please. Yeah, threat and error management. You're all probably at this point thinking, oh my gosh, Matt, no, I don't want this. Where's the leave button? No, don't stay with me. I'm not going to give you a threat and error management lesson at all. Just to remind you that threats and or errors can lead, in the terminology, to undesired aircraft state, i.e. bad things happening to the aircraft, to your flight, it being unsafe or whatever. The only reason I put this up is that we should remember that threat and error, the foundation of it is the acceptance that threats are going to be out there. Threats will happen and threaten our flight, and we are going to make errors. So accepting that that is going to happen, you remember, threat and error management is not an attempt to eliminate threats or errors, but it's concerned with the management of them. So I'm going to pick three things that I think could threaten us as we come back to flying, and then just perhaps some mitigations we can make to try and reduce the impact or likelihood of those threats, causing an unsafe situation. Before we start looking at those three, though, I'd like to start with another poll. So if we can have poll 3 on the screen. Here we go. What worries you most about flying after a break? Is it infringing airspace, bad landings, engine failure, problems, tech problems, or a stall spin incident as well? So let's say there's no right or wrong answers to this at all, but it's just a case of what worries you most when you've been flying after a break. You're not been able to fly because the airfield's been bogged in, aircraft's been in annual, or family pressures. Some of you may have sadly had COVID and been off feeling unwell, not being able to fly. But what worries you most after flight as well? So if we could have the results up on those as well. Here we go. So again, a fairly even split. Interestingly, stall spin incidents quite low down, but yeah, so the landing is thing. But look at that, infringing airspace up at 33%. And this is interesting, and it's something that we are looking at here as well, because if you related these to what is most likely to cause damage to the aircraft or a risk of injury or worse, you could say, well, actually, having a bad landing, a runway excursion, or an engine failure could be more of that. Is infringing airspace is a risk in terms of legislation, in terms of risk to other aircraft or whatever. So it's interesting, but these are all things that are going to be there in the back of your mind, and we'll be talking about capacity in just a minute. Thanks, Chloe. So let's look at the first threat then that I'd like to, rusty handling skills. So if we go for slide, please. Look at this. So lovely little aircraft, Eurofox. Some of you may have flown the Eurofox Rotax, really capable, nice aeroplane. This is owned by a very good friend of mine at flying school, and I was going to do some testing on this aircraft as well, but I hadn't done any tail wheel for a little while. Excuse me. It's got a Rotax engine with a couple of Little gotchas, mistakes you can make in terms of engine management, in terms of ECU management there as well. So I decided to go for a flight with my very good friend, and it was quite challenging actually. There was a little bit of a gusty crosswind, and you know, it's not a heavy aeroplane, it's not a very big aeroplane, just a two-seater, but it can actually be quite a demanding aeroplane to fly. And that came into rusty handling skills. I was really glad my friend was with me, you know, to give me some tips and you know, give me some reassurance there as I flew it as well. And it just brought it home to me as well that, you know, especially in roll and that as well, it can be quite demanding, you know, even for those of us that have got a fair bit of time, tail wheel, or have done other stuff beforehand as well. But like I say, if we are rusty, it makes us more at risk of a loss of control event, runway excursion, loss of control in bad weather. So rusty handling is not something we really want. So what can we do? What's the real mitigation we can do for that? Well, a key thing is pre-flight reading. Chris has already touched on it there as well. But one of the things we really want to do is revise speeds, key speeds, handling procedures for our aircraft type as well. One thing you may want to consider doing is creating some little personal reference guides for key areas of flight, like the circuit, like practice force landings and things like that. So I've got an example I'll show you. If we can have the next slide, please. There you go. This is one I use for the PA28. It's just got some stuff on there about the circuit, the glide circuit, some key speeds, some key force landing points and speeds, a couple of some facts and figures about fuel loading and things like that as well. You may want to create something like that for your aircraft type. Just that one's A4, folds over into A5 to fit into a book or a knee board or whatever. And I find that quite useful. In fact, just the very act of creating these is something, and updating them is, you know, I find something very useful. It helps, you know, get things into my brain there as well. When you do get to fly, there's some of the key disciplines on this card that you'll see that I recommend you practice and fly as well. I think somebody just mentioned it in the chat box as well. Steep turns, standard stall recovery, practice force landings, circuits, including touch and goes, if appropriate at your airfield, the go around, you know, other emergencies like a practice IFATO and things like that. So these are all things that are well worth practicing, that you might get out of practice doing on a regular basis. And one thing you can do is create a card or a sheet maybe that you could keep in your logbook to keep track of when you last did these things. And you might even want to set yourself a periodicity that you feel comfortable with in order to practice them. So you might set yourself a target. Well, at least every quarter this year, you know, I'm going to fly a good practice landing off airfield, practice force landing that I'm happy with. And I will also at least every quarter do some circuits of all the different types, flapless glide, including some touch and goes and a go around. You know, whatever you feel comfortable with for your experience, your aircraft type, your airfield as well. And again, you know, if in doubt, or you're finding you're struggling with things, that's the time to maybe get a qualified instructor who is qualified and current and confident on your type and class as well. Remember going back to my little Eurofox example as well, my friend who owned it, very current, very competent on that as well. You know, would I have got such good value out of jumping in with somebody that is spending all their time on PA28s or Cessna 152s? Possibly not. So yeah, do think about you know, getting the good source of advice as well. There is loads of reading on loss of control and things to think about on the Astral Aviation website. Links are available at the end of this workshop, or if you just Google the website as well, there's loads of really good stuff there about handling skills there as well. So I'm not going to cover it all here, but there's some good reading you can get into there as well. Before we move off onto capacity, which is the next threat that I'd like to talk about, let's do another poll as well. And this is related to capacity. Here we go. What do you think of the use of checklists to help build capacity? And by capacity, I mean, you know, your brain's on the day ability do stuff and cope with stuff. That's what I mean by capacity. If you're not sure, we'll discuss it more in a minute. So you go, what do you think you use checklists? Some you may use them all the time when flying. Some may use them on the ground, but try and do checks in the air from memory. Use them if you can't remember something, otherwise all memory. I do all my checks from memory. There you go, a few options for you to have a look at there. Again, there is no right or wrong answer. There's no legislation. You know, we're just interested to see what people find on this as well. Interested to see your thoughts.
As a matter of interest, Matt, while the people are filling that in, what do you do?
It depends what operation I'm in and what type I'm in as well. So mainly if I'm flying something like a DA-42 or something like that in a commercial training environment, use a checklist on the ground and some of the airborne checks from memory. Yep. But flying with the Air Force in the tutor, we do all of our checks from memory on there as well. So it can be different. Here we go. So use them all the time, use them on the ground. So yeah, so most people are using checklists in one form or another, which, you know, is a great way to build capacity. One thing I would say about checklists as well is it's brilliant to use them. Make sure the ones are right for your aircraft type, make sure they're up to date, make sure they're relevant, and you know, using the right ones. You know, you could look at a PA-28, you'd think it's very simple, lots of different variants, lots of different things in there as well. We're only discussing at my flying club today, we're having some Garmin G5 electronic flight instruments installed in our airplane, and we were talking about we need to update our club checklist because there is going to be some little differences with the startup and shutdown sequences, and also you've got to set the pressure in a couple of different places as well. So we're already saying, oh, we might need to update them in that as well. So now have a think about it. If your aircraft's changed or if you're using an old one, is it really relevant? Great stuff. So let's look at the capacity. I've touched on capacity in the capacity bucket. So here we go. Not going to give you a psychology or physiology lecture, but let's just imagine this is our capacity stress bucket. Yep. And our bucket is our ability to carry out flying, you know, and it's a certain size, our bucket. So stress flows in. So those arrows flowing into your bucket, they're things like passengers, RT demands, weather, having to remember your checks, you know, working hard at the handling skills that we talked about as well. And normally our tap there at the bottom's open because we're current, we're on top of our game, and we remember checks and things easily. So stress is flowing in, but the tap is taking it out at the bottom. So things are balancing. But if we have limited recency, our tap could start to become closed again, and the level in our bucket could start filling up and overflowing. And when it's overflowing, we run out of capacity, we start missing things, we start making errors, and we don't have any ability to cope with additional new demands coming in. So if we do have a rough running engine, if our stress bucket is already full, already overflowing, we can't cope with it. We don't deal with it very well. So what we want to do is try and keep the level in that bucket low when we start to return to flying. Okay, so what we're talking about here is keeping the flight profile simple, using checklists, having done the revision, all this good stuff to start our starting level in the bucket low. So when stress flows in, as it will do, remember I said threats are always going to be present, our bucket's not going to overflow. So a little bit simplistic, a little bit contrived as a thing, but it maybe gives you an idea. What we're trying to do is keep the level low by keeping things simple as we go along at the beginning. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so checklists, there's a few examples there. They can be great for capacity building, and they're a good aid for remembering everything during pre-flight planning as well. So Astral Aviation did some really cool stuff with John Hunt, flying reporter. You may have seen him on social media. And they did came up with John's work, a pre-flight checklist as well. Now you may be thinking, oh yeah, more checklists, oh, the last thing we need. But that's not the case. If you can see it on the screen there, you can download it from the website. It's dead easy, and certainly when you're getting back into flying as well, you know, you don't have to tick it or anything like that. You can just run down it, and go, yeah, done that, covered that, yeah, done that, yeah, remembered that, and stuff like that. It's just a real simple, before that last thing, before walking to the aeroplane, go down, have I covered all of this stuff on there as well? And you may want to take it and adapt it to yourself as well. We use one in a couple of clubs that I'm at, and it's got things like, have you remembered to take the Sky Echo device with you off charge? That's a kind of thing. Have you taken the aircraft keys with you? All of these little gotchas that can just add stress to the flight. So it's quite useful. You might want to use that one or do that one, laminate it, stick it on your knee board. Like I say, you can just run down it in your head and go, yeah, covered all that, happy, good to go. That's what it is. And I think Chloe has put a link in the chat box, so you can have a look at that as well. Brilliant. Right. So finally, let's look at the third threat I want to mention as well. So we have a next slide, please. Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. So you're probably thinking, what is Matt going on about again here? But what I'm talking about here is it's important we keep up to date with changes in airspace, procedures, regulations. This could be at a local airfield, or it could be nationally, things that have changed as well. So 2 things you can do to really help you out here as well. Somebody already mentioned it, so somebody's really on it, which is brilliant. I think it's Andrew, somebody. Skyway Code, brilliant document from the CAA. You can download it as a PDF on your iPad. It's got all bookmarks in there as well. And it's really easily accessible, readable device. It's free and it's got everything to do. So, if you're traveling for work, or, you sat at home and your partner or housemate or whatever is watching some boring TV program, it's great to just flick through and, read and catch up on that. It's really, really accessible format, and it's really good stuff there as well. Skywise, there's the address there, skywise.ca.co.uk. You can sign up on there for totally free email updates, and they will come out and you can pick the categories, and it will let you know about things like webinars like this that we're doing right now. It will also give you updates on any legislation change or any new safety sense leaflets or things like that as well. Just pops into your inbox, and again, doesn't clutter up your inbox. You're not going to get loads of these a day. It's really good, and everybody really should sign up for those as well. It's the best way of getting up-to-date information as well. Chris has already talked about leaving plenty of time for pre-reading. And I recommend making use of free webinars, training resources and that as well. And decent internet resources can really help and be really useful as well. Internet forums, Facebook forums, and that can be really supportive. You can meet friends, you can get some great advice, make connections and networks, and get steers to clubs or things like that as well. But just remember, not everybody on the internet is who they purport to be or who they claim to be. And, I have seen some really, really quite duff advice on some internet forums as well. So, they are great, but take it with a pinch of salt and just use your critical thinking on it. And, just think, am I being, what I've been told totally right here as well? I've seen some debates on stalling and that as well, and some really quite interesting things from people who claim to be instructors. Who are they? I don't know. They're anonymous on the forum. Could be absolutely anybody. I don't know what their qualifications are. So take it thing. And here's a little example where you apply some critical thinking analysis. So if you have the next slide, please. You could think, yep, tell you what, I'll download some takeoff performance charts and practice working those out for my airfield, and I'll do all the good stuff and work out the temperatures. It's going to be a bit warmer in spring, but grass might be quite long. I'll work out all those factors and all the rest of it. That's great. It's brilliant. This is one I just Googled and downloaded. Somebody had scanned it in on the internet. Great to use. Don't need to use the one in the club flight manual. I can just print out this and go and use it and practice it. Great. However, have a look at the top there. Yeah, PA28 181. So this is for a 180 PA28, an Archer. Okay, so all of the club aircraft in 2 of the clubs I fly at are PA28 161s with the 160 engine. So this is the wrong performance chart for the smaller engined aircraft as well. Another club that I've got has got PA28 181, and it's also got a PA28 151 with a 150 engine as well. So 30 horsepower difference, two aircraft that look superficially exactly the same on the outside. So again, you know, check your sources and be careful of just downloading stuff. Make sure you're getting the right ones for your aircraft and your operation here as well. Okay, thanks. That's a really quick can through three threats that that we could potentially face as well. But I think the summary is it all comes back to that pre-reading and preparation. So the most you can precondition your brain to expect the unexpected, the most you can preload your brain with facts, figures, and things to help you operate the aircraft safely. That's going to keep that level in your stress bucket low when you go back flying, and that's what gives you capacity. And capacity is what you want, because when you're working hard, having not flown for a while, when you're potentially facing extra demands, getting back into it, that's when you want to, like I say, have done all that good stuff to keep your level low before you start. Great, and that's it from me. We can take some questions, I think, Chris, and some people already popping some things in the box to discuss.
We can, yeah. Thanks, Matt. Don't know about your stress bucket, but mine's pretty much at capacity at the moment, trying to deal with all the tech. I'm normally pretty good with tech, but it's been a bit of a challenge this evening. But so thank you, Matt. Yeah, I would echo Matt's points there, really, and to reinforce, prepare. You know, all of that preparation. You know, that list of stuff which I'll put on the website later as well. You've got the checklist that we've done. We've done an article recently on returning to flying, so please do have a look at that. There's also a little gizzer in there that Matt's created to track your currencies. So there's a whole bunch of resources out there, so please do it. But as I said before, you know, when we start stacking up all this stuff that we've got to read before we get anywhere near the aircraft, we basically should have started 3 weeks ago. So there's so much stuff to get out there and digest. But please do take your time before you jump in the aircraft so that you can maximize that first flight back and have the most capacity that you can have. Lovely. Right, let's do some questions. We've got one from Stuart, which popped in earlier, Matt, which is about medical requirements for licenses. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, so medical requirements are very complex and very related to what license or licenses you hold as well. However, the key changes, most people I think are fairly familiar with. If you're a commercial license holder, you're going to be doing commercial stuff, you need to get your class 1 medical renewed. Most people are fairly familiar with, if you a PPL, you need a class 2 medical. Most people are fairly happy that if you're on a LAPL, you would need a LAPL medical as well. What has come in recent years and has now been brought into law last year is use of the personal medical declaration. So if you look on the CAA website under personal medical declaration, you're now able to use a PMD for a lot of the flying that may be appropriate for you at private level. So it's entirely possible that you might be able to go and make a personal medical declaration in order to exercise your PPL or your LAPL in the UK on a G registered aircraft as well, as an alternative to getting a full medical with an aviation medical examiner as well. It basically, in many respects, if you can drive a car and you feel fit and well to meet some of the DVLA requirements, you can make a medical declaration and go flying using that in the UK, like say in a G-registered aircraft. So it may well be an alternative to you getting a full medical as well. Irv Lee, often quite well known on the GA, he has a section on his website called License Medical Combos, which is really good, although it's very long and detailed because it's a very complex subject as well, but that's worth looking at as well. And obviously the CAA medical declaration area as well. All I would say is if you have any doubts about your fitness to fly, that's the time to seek advice of a medical professional, whether it be your GP, or if in an aviation context, an aviation medical examiner as well. I was told the other day a story about an individual who was having some epilepsy problems that had developed in his 20s, and had given up his aviation medical and was making a personal medical declaration and continuing flying. You know, some conditions like that may not really be appropriate for the aviation environment, and you really want to seek the advice of professionals to go and do some of the various types of flying with various medical conditions. So, bit of a long rambling answer because it's a long rambling subject. But the key thing is, if you're not able, or because of availability or time or whatever, to go and gain a class 2 medical, you may well be able to make a personal medical declaration. The other thing that you may want to look at as well, so if you're a class 2 medical holder, depending on your age and certain conditions, it will drop down to being a LAPL validity, maybe for the second year of validity. So there do have the ability to use your PPL with the LAPL validity portion of your medical to operate within LAPL privileges as well. Again, complex subject, can't go into it in detail here, but there is options as well in the second year of your validity of your medical to use the LAPL portion of it as well. So this is all really good stuff from the CAA. It's all part of the CAA's drive to deregulate and simplify some of the recreational medical side as well. So it's very UK specific, so you can't exercise some of this stuff outside of UK there as well. Okay, so probably enough about that, unless anybody's got anything more specific. I think Chloe's put a link on Earth's site, and I recommend that. There's some really good stuff there that Earth's put together.
Great, thank you. Okay, we've got another question coming from an anonymous attendee. So to carry passengers, 3 takeoffs and 3 landings in 90 days. Can touch and goes qualified at an airfield long enough to permit slowing down to a slow taxi, or is a full stop required?
No full stops required. Touch and goes are fine. Yep, touch and go is a landing followed by a takeoff. So touch and goes are absolutely fine. You don't even have to slow. There's no specific requirement to go to slow taxi or whatever. But yeah, properly executed touch and go in terms of a landing into a takeoff is fine for the three takeoff landings for passenger carrying currency.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. I'm just going to pick up on a point that Sean just made in the chat box there. Worth understanding the difference between currency and competency. Always a topic being discussed after a break in pause and flying. What are your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, very good. Very good point. And it comes back to something I said, I think, in one of the other webinars as well. So the example is, I've got some friends that fly long haul for the airlines. They're starting to get back to it as well. If you look at their hours have been pretty very good actually over the last period. You would think, oh, it's got loads of hours, but actually a lot of this is in the cruise on autopilot in a very capable aeroplane like a 787. And some of it is actually asleep in a bunk, going over or to or from America and places like that as well. So although, my friends may have a lot of hours when you look at their logbook, how much light aircraft flying has he done? Has he done an AFATO? Has he done a stall? Has he done a touch and go? So whereas somebody that might have done some of what we're suggesting is, you look at their logbook and think, oh, they've only done 5 hours since Christmas. But if some of those 5 hours are really value added, they've gone and done some circuits, they've gone off and practiced PFLs. They were a bit worried about stalling, so they did an hour of instructor for their biennial and did an hour of standard stall recoveries and different configurations. There might be some really kind of protein rich stuff they've done. So their 5 hours versus my friends, 150 hours since Christmas, might be far more valuable in our environment there as well. So and I think that's what Sean's getting at as well. And also what's always worrying, so if you feel you're flying, Chris and I were talking actually before we started about flying on experience as well, weren't we?
Oh, yes.
So you may be legal, you may be within your flying club currency limit or whatever, but so for example, one of the clubs I operate at has a 45-day limit, another one has a 60-day one. Well, if you may be in currency, as it were, in terms of flying order book, but if you're always bouncing, between just flying, doing a local area trip every 42 days or whatever, you may not actually be that competent. If you're depending on what you've been doing in that time and how often you've been doing it there as well, and in various disciplines. So I think the answer to this is you need to have a bit of introspection and, sit down and have a look through your logbook and go, when did I last do some of this stuff? When did I last? And that goes for instructors and examiners like myself as well. So when I was doing my logbook at the end of, just before in the Christmas break, actually, I looked back and the last time I'd done a trip that wasn't an exam trip was the end of July. So if I was honest with myself, in those months, August to December, how much actual hands-on flying had I done in the aeroplane versus me sitting there observing and monitoring other stuff. So yeah, as an examiner, pretty much all you do is put the aircraft into a spiral dive, which then the candidate has to recover from. So, again, yeah, it might look at that my hours were pretty good and stuff, but actual, hands-on competency was I getting a bit rusty.
Great, thanks. Right, one other question come in from Vanessa. Thank you, Vanessa. Are there any stats showing an increase in the accident rate following a layoff period? So I've not seen any per se. I would think intuitively, I would suggest it should be more incidents after a layoff period, but I've not seen anything as such. I can go ahead and have a look, see if I find something. If I do find something, I'll stick them on the website. Have you seen anything on that, Matt?
Not that I can pick out to hand, but I do know there was after the COVID layoffs and that there was some increase in takeoff and landing instances. I believe there was some data that showed that as well, and there was obviously as well. We do see spikes in airspace infringements as well at certain times of the year. Now, some of that may be related, of course, to just the number of flying hours people are doing in spring, summer is more than winter and that as well. But some of that, yeah, in fact, Graham Purchase is just exactly, Graham is highlighting what I'm saying. Infringements peak after the usual winter layoff as well. Yeah, so again, that's it's a threat. Yeah, people busy, at capacity flying the aeroplane, and they make the error of infringing controlled airspace. So I think there is some stats that would allude to that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And it comes back to what we've been saying from the outset, which is prepare. So we've just run out of questions there. So obviously we've answered everything that's on everyone's minds this evening. So I'll give you the next 30 seconds.
Well, there's a couple in the chat from earlier, Chris. I'd like to just pull back to as well. Somebody's put, do have a Word or PowerPoint template for the essentials card? Really happy to share that on the website if it's not already on there, so we can do that as an example that people can have a look at as well. Keith asked about why do we not scan and print charts from your own aircraft manual? Yes, Keith, that's exactly what you should do and use those as well. A couple of gotchas to be aware of. I did find at a flying school as well, they'd been repeatedly photocopying and then photocopies of various charts. And what had happened over time was the photocopier had done some weird kind of scaling thing and actually stretched and distorted some of the charts as well. So just be careful if you're doing that as well. And if you've got your own aircraft and you can get access to flight manual and charts, great. Your club should do them as well. I've been to a number of clubs where with candidates or instructional students, I've said, oh, let's get the flight manual out as well. And you go and ask for it at the ops desk or whatever, and they go, oh, no, they're all locked up. We don't let students mess them up if we let them get into those. And they're all locked up somewhere. Or even one place I went to, and oh, no, the aircraft owner keeps that. We just lease the aircraft. The aircraft owner's got the flight manual. So, you should be able to get access to it. So as Keith says, from your own original one as well. Seamus Hunt asked about, would you advise bashing the circuit in the first few hours after the winter layoff? So I think circuits are valuable because there's a lot of disciplines included in the circuit, especially if you include things like the go around as well. But what I would suggest, a normal kind of good profile that you typically do is initially go out of circuit, go and depart into the local area, get yourself familiar back with the aircraft, get yourself settled down again, and then maybe do some steep turn stalls and things like that, and then come back into the circuit for your first flight, maybe rather than just going straight into the circuit as well. Especially you might want to consider if the aircraft's been parked up as well, going into the local area in a more calm environment might give you a chance just to check all the avionics, check all the systems, check everything's all settled down and working well as well. Okay, Chris.
Lovely. Okay, I think that brings us to our final slide for the evening. So we hope that you've all been able to take something away from this evening, and hopefully, yeah, it's been useful for you. If there's anything you'd like to revisit, a replay of the workshop will be available along with the list of resources and all the stuff we've spoken about this evening, and that'll be on the website in the next few days. As per normal, as once we finish tonight, a survey will pop up, and also to come through to you via your email. Please do take the time to fill that in, because your feedback to us is very valuable indeed. Of course, I'll keep banging this, but please do head over to the website, www.astralaviationconsulting.com, for a whole host of useful resources, not just to do with the return to flying, but a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And of course, you can follow us on all the usual social channels you can see on the screen. In our last survey, over 80% of you mentioned that you wanted some form of certificate of attendance for safety evenings such as this. Some people like to keep them in the logbooks, others use them as a personal record of attendance. Therefore, we're going to start emailing those out. So we'll try and email those out to you over the next couple of days as well. So look out for that, please. Sadly, we have run out of time tonight, and I have managed to eventually wrestle with the tech gremlins to get us to the end. So all that remains for me to say is thanks ever so much to everybody for coming along, and thanks ever so much to Matt as per normal. Thank you to everybody, and hopefully see you again soon.
Thanks very much, and hope everybody has a really enjoyable return to getting back flying, and let's fingers crossed for a good run of weather, unlike we've had recently. Thank you.